The wheels clicked softly over the cracks in the sidewalk, tick, tick, like a metronome counting down to something bad. The sun hung low and heavy, baking the pavement until it shimmered like water. Michael Brooks rolled his wheelchair past manicured lawns and mailbox posts, his army duffel slung across his lap. This was supposed to be a quiet day. He'd just finished his rehab session. Shoulders aching, sweat sticking to his back brace, mind somewhere far away, in another country, in another body, with legs that still moved. But here he was, 2 carbon fiber prosthetics sitting and used at home, a scar that ran up his spine like a zipper, and a silence in his soul that nothing could fill. A police cruiser slid around the corner behind him, slow and deliberate, like a shark circling prey. "Hey," a voice called out. "Hold up a second." Michael stopped. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew that tone. He'd used it himself once, back when his badge still meant something and not just a license to intimidate. 2 officers stepped out. The first was lean, wiry, and twitchy. Short-sleeved uniform, mirrored sunglasses, hands already drifting too close to his belt. Brent Lowry. Michael didn't know the name yet, but he knew the type. The second, Chuck Dalton, was bulkier, slower, the kind of man who never questioned his partner, just followed with his arms crossed and his mouth shut. "What's in the bag?" Lowry asked, pointing to Michael's duffel. "Gym clothes. Sweat. Nothing you'd want." Michael's voice was calm, even. Not sarcastic, but not submissive either. "You live around here?" Dalton added. Michael nodded. 3 blocks that way. "Want my ID?" Lowry stepped closer. "Nah. I think I want to see what's in that bag first." Michael blinked, muscles in his jaw tightening. "Is there a reason you stopped me?" Lowry leaned down, too close. "Reason?" "Yeah. You look like someone who doesn't belong here." Dalton shifted uneasily, looking around the empty street. A sprinkler clicked in the distance. Michael slowly removed the duffel, unzipped it, and held it open. A rolled towel. A water bottle. Protein bar. Resistance bands. Nothing more. Lowry stared a beat too long, like he was disappointed. Then, without warning, he yanked the bag from Michael's lap and flung it on the ground. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Michael asked, voice still steady, but colder now. Lowry smirked. "I don't like your tone, Wheels." That's when it happened. Lowry grabbed the side of the wheelchair and tipped it, hard. Michael hit the pavement sideways with a thud that cracked through the silence. Pain jolted up his ribs. Dalton stepped in too late, muttering, "Jesus, Brent," but not stopping him. Lowry pressed a knee into Michael's chest and hissed, "You think you're better than me? Just because you served? That it?" Michael's eyes locked onto his. There was no fear in them. Only calculation. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Michael said quietly. Lowry laughed. "Yeah. What are you gonna do? Crawl after me?" But Michael didn't answer. Because the moment that knee lifted off his chest, his mind had already started a different kind of war. The bruise on his ribs pulsed in sync with his heartbeat. Michael sat on the floor of his apartment, shirt off, a cold pack pressed against his side. The wheelchair was upright again, one armrest slightly cracked from the fall. The duffel lay nearby, contents scattered, but intact. He stared at the blank TV screen, his reflection barely visible in it. His breathing was slow. Controlled. Not because he wasn't angry, but because rage was a tool, and he'd learned long ago not to swing it blindly. His military instincts were back online now. Every detail from the incident had already been logged, sorted, and filed in his mind. Lowry. Caucasian. 30s, tattoo on the left wrist, a snake eating its tail. Poor trigger discipline. Aggressive posture, likely compensating. Dalton. Follower. Heavy set. Right knee bothered him, shifted weight frequently. Glanced around like someone with a guilty conscience. Michael pulled open a drawer under his kitchen counter. Inside, a black case. He clicked it open slowly. Not a weapon, not yet. A flash drive. A burner phone. A business card. On the card. Sergeant Alex Moreno. Army Cyber Intel, Rhett, you need eyes. I see everything. Michael plugged the drive into his laptop. The screen blinked alive with software that wasn't exactly legal, but that wasn't the point anymore. It had been a long time since he touched this side of himself. It felt like slipping back into old boots. Heavy, but right. He typed. Need access. 2 officers. Brent Lowry / Chuck Dalton. Redwood PD. Any complaints, footage, body cam data, dispatch logs. Quiet. Fast. He hit send. The clock started. Back in the precinct, Lowry was laughing. Retelling the story like a joke. You should have seen his face, Chuck. Man looked like he was gonna cry. I swear, half these guys fake the war stories for clout. Dalton didn't laugh. He sat at his desk, staring at his screen, jaw tight. Lowry noticed. Oh, come on. You got soft now. Dalton muttered, we went too far. Lowry leaned in. No, you went too quiet. That's how these things blow up, when someone runs their mouth. Dalton said nothing. But he glanced at the corner security camera. The red light was off. It should have been on. Back at Michael's place, a reply appeared on the laptop. You're gonna want to see this. They've got priors. And guess what, your takedown. No body cam. No dispatch call. It's like it never happened, unless someone else recorded it. Michael stared at the message. Then reached into another drawer and pulled out a tiny GoPro, scorched on one side, held together with tape. It had survived a firefight in Mosul. He smiled to himself. Looks like you boys forgot one thing, he whispered. Then he opened a file on his desktop labeled Ghost Protocol. He hovered the mouse for a second. Do you want to activate? Y/N. He clicked Y. 2 hours later, the precinct parking lot was bathed in artificial orange light, buzzing with moths and silence. Officer Dalton lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, leaning against his dented Ford Explorer. He hated smoking, but tonight it wasn't about the smoke, it was about the distraction. He couldn't stop seeing the look in Michael's eyes. Not anger. Not fear. Precision. Dalton had seen that look once before, in a Marine's face during a hostage standoff 5 years ago. That man didn't blink. He just waited for the perfect moment to strike. Dalton took another drag. He felt it in his gut. Something was coming. Michael sat at his kitchen table, a map of the town laid out in front of him. Red pins marked police cameras. Blue ones, private security feeds. Green, blind spots. He knew the streets better than the men who patrolled them. On his screen, new files opened one after another. Complaints filed against Officer Brent Lowry, excessive force. Racial profiling. Destruction of property. Internal reviews, all dismissed. All signed off by the same lieutenant. Michael narrowed his eyes. Lieutenant Harmon Blake. 23 years in the department. Political. Protected. Dirty. Michael leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. I'm not just taking them down, he said quietly. I'm burning their tree at the root. Meanwhile, Brent Lowry was getting very drunk. He sat in a booth at O'Hara's bar, boasting to a girl half his age about how he kept the streets clean. She smiled politely, more focused on her phone than his words. Until she noticed something strange. Her phone buzzed, a new airdrop request. From, unknown. File, you missed a camera. Lowry blinked as she turned her screen toward him. On it, video footage of him tipping Michael out of the wheelchair. High angle. Clean audio. Clear face. The color drained from his skin. He snatched the phone, mouth dry, eyes darting. The airdrop disappeared. No trace. No sender. The girl stood up, confused and weirded out. What the hell was that? Lowry didn't answer. He was already running for the door. Back at Michael's apartment, the GoPro sat on the table, still recording. Michael poured a glass of whiskey, took a slow sip. Behind him, his laptop pinged again. Incoming call, video feed encrypted. Caller, Sergeant Alex Moreno. Michael accepted. A grainy but familiar face appeared on the screen, glasses, beard, tired eyes that had seen too much war and too many hard drives. You just dropped a tactical nuke in his lap, Alex said with a grin. He ran out of the bar like someone set his shoes on fire. Michael nodded. I want Blake next. Can you get me a route on his commute tomorrow? Already got it. You're not gonna do something crazy, are you? Michael didn't answer right away. Then. No. I'm gonna do something smart. Redwood PD's morning briefing room was unusually quiet. Lieutenant Harmon Blake stood at the front, pacing with a clipboard in hand, jaw clenched just tight enough to crack a tooth. His hair was slicked back, his uniform crisp, but the bags under his eyes told the real story. Someone had leaked a video. Not to the press, not yet. But it was making rounds. Through anonymous emails. Flash drives. QR codes taped to street signs near the station. They were being hunted. I want to know who the hell recorded that footage, Blake barked. And I want that file gone. Wiped. Deleted. I don't care if you have to burn a server room to do it. Lowry sat stiff in his seat, eyes darting. His hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. Dalton looked even worse, pale, silent, sweating. Wasn't body cam, Dalton muttered. We turned them off. It wasn't us. Then someone else was there. Blake stepped closer. You idiots didn't check your surroundings. Lowry opened his mouth to respond, but then the power cut out. The lights. The monitors. Everything. Darkness swallowed the room for 3 seconds. Then the projector on the wall blinked to life. It wasn't connected to anything. A black screen. White text. How many more videos do you think I have? MB. A moment later, the power returned. The room was dead silent. Blake stormed out without another word. Across town, Michael watched the whole thing unfold in real time on a tapped internal feed. He sat still, calm, but his fingers dug slightly into the armrest of his chair. His chest rose and fell just a little quicker. Not because he was afraid, but because memories were clawing at the edges. Afghanistan, 2015. He and 6 others moved through a bombed-out village. Intel said the compound was clear. It wasn't. The blast took both his legs and 3 of his brothers. One of them had been his best friend. Reed Carson. Michael remembered the weight of Reed's body as he pulled him out under fire. The blood. The screams. The silence that followed. After that day, Michael had stopped believing in medals. Or justice. Or institutions. Now he believed in something else. Precision. Payback. Peace, through fear. Later that day, Blake drove home the long way, checking his mirrors, watching for tails. He didn't notice the drone, high above his car, following him like a silent wasp. He pulled into his garage and the door closed behind him. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. One image. No text. He opened it. A photo of his house. Taken 3 seconds ago. He dropped the phone. Heart racing, he stormed through the house, gun drawn, searching rooms that felt too quiet, too clean. In the kitchen, something was waiting. A small, white envelope on the counter. He hadn't seen it before. He picked it up, opened it. Inside, a single photograph. Reed Carson. Smiling. Alive. Wearing fatigues. A note on the back. Your mistake wasn't just hurting me. It was forgetting who I lost. The local news called it an anonymous cyber prank. A flicker on the precinct's projector. A technical malfunction. Nothing to see here. But someone was watching. Dozens of people, then hundreds, maybe thousands, had received the video link in their inbox. No subject line. No sender. Just a quiet threat wrapped in truth. And in a small room at KRWZ 9 News, investigative journalist Ava Merrill watched it on loop. No timestamp. No location metadata. No upload trail. But the moment she saw the officer tip that man out of his wheelchair, something clenched in her chest. Not just because it was disgusting, but because she knew that face. Michael Brooks. She hadn't seen him in nearly a decade. But she'd written a feature on him once, a deep dive into the life of a war hero who vanished from public life after losing both legs in Syria. And now here he was, bleeding on a sidewalk, being brutalized by men who thought they'd never be caught. Ava stood, grabbed her camera, and said to her editor. I need 2 days. No questions. You'll want this story. Michael wasn't hiding. He was hunting. From his apartment, a quiet hum of machines pulsed around him, laptop fans, hard drives, encrypted routers stacked like bricks. The air smelled like dust, coffee, and something older, old war. The kind that doesn't leave your bones. Alex Moreno's voice crackled through the speaker. You're making waves, Mike. There's chatter in a federal thread. Someone tagged your name, I wiped it. But you've got maybe 48 hours before Homeland starts sniffing around. Michael didn't flinch. Then we're right on time. You still want the commutes? Yes. And I need facial ID matches for any plainclothes cops in Blake's unit. I'm not walking into a trap. There was silence for a second. Then Alex asked, quieter. Are you sure you're okay? Michael stared at the wall in front of him. Photos. Maps. Faces. A digital war board. Then his eyes fell to the dog tags hanging from a nail. Reed Carson. OPOS U.S. Army. His hand clenched slightly. No. I'm not okay. But I'm ready. That night, a knock came at the door. Michael rolled to it cautiously, hand resting near a hidden drawer. He checked the peephole. And froze. She hadn't changed much. Ava Merrill, still blunt-cut hair, still wearing that same intense fire in her eyes like she could see straight through the bullshit. He opened the door. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said, "What the hell are you doing, Michael?" He exhaled slowly. Finishing what they started. She stepped inside without asking. You know they're going to come after you. Not just the cops, feds. I can help. But you need to stop before this becomes something you can't come back from. Michael didn't answer. He turned the monitor toward her. Dozens of open tabs. Internal reports. Leaked files. Names. Her mouth opened slightly as she saw it all. He finally spoke. I don't want revenge, Ava. I want exposure. I want truth. And I want every single person who looked the other way to know I see them now. She looked at him for a long moment. Then said, "Okay. But you're not doing this alone anymore." Meanwhile, in a dark room across town, Lieutenant Harmon Blake opened an email with shaky hands. No subject. Just a video attachment. He clicked play. It wasn't the beating. It was footage from inside his own house. He was asleep in bed. And the camera was 6 feet away from him. Breathing heavy. Recording. The knock wasn't loud. It was the kind of knock that made you check your windows first, the kind you didn't want to answer. Lieutenant Harmon Blake stood at his front door in a wrinkled t-shirt, a pistol holstered under his waistband, and the sour stink of sleepless paranoia leaking off his skin. When he opened it, he saw 2 men in sharp suits. No uniforms. No smiles. Bad sign. Lieutenant Blake. The taller one flashed a badge. Special Agent Thomas Greer. Homeland Security. This is Agent Davis. Blake blinked. This about the precinct? Greer didn't answer. He stepped inside like he owned the place. We've picked up some chatter. Someone's leaking internal police files onto a private darknet forum. The same platform used by anarchist militias in Oregon and whistleblowers in D.C. Blake tried to act indifferent. And you think that's me? Greer turned. No. We think someone you pissed off is behind it. And we want to know why. Blake's mouth twitched. I've got no clue what you're talking about. Davis spoke for the first time. Then maybe you can explain why your home internet pinged the same server in Nevada our cyber unit flagged 2 hours ago. That was a lie. A test. And Blake failed. He swallowed hard. I want a lawyer. Greer smiled. You're not under arrest, Lieutenant. Yet. But if something happens, if this goes public, we'll make damn sure your pension's the first casualty. They left without another word. And Blake, for the first time in years, felt afraid. At the same time, Ava sat across from Michael in his apartment, voice low and urgent. The moment they realize you've built a net around them, they'll spin it like you're unstable. A rogue veteran with PTSD and a grudge. Michael nodded. Let them. That only works if I break. Then don't break, she said. Beat them to the punch. She slid a flash drive across the table. It's a burner story. Just enough to get KRWZ interested, no names yet. But once you say the word, I can start the clock. Michael took the drive but didn't move. You're risking everything, he said. Ava smirked. You saved me once, remember? Michael looked down. That night in Mosul. The collapsed building. Her leg pinned under debris. His hands covered in blood, hers and his. He nodded once. Start the clock. Meanwhile, inside Redwood PD, Officer Chuck Dalton sat alone in the locker room, staring at the floor. He couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Couldn't stop hearing Michael's voice. You just made the worst mistake of your life. Dalton had grown up believing the badge meant something. That the system, even when flawed, worked itself out. Now he saw the rot from inside. He looked down at the envelope in his lap. Inside, a burner phone. No name. No instructions. Just one saved number. He stared at it for a long time before pressing call. 3 rings. Then a voice answered. Dalton, Michael said. Dalton exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a week. I want out, he said. I'll give you what you need. But I want immunity. Michael paused. Truth first. Then we talk deals. Dalton nodded, even though no one could see. There's something you don't know, he said quietly. Blake wasn't just covering Lowry's ass. He was using him. For years. We've got an entire cold case locker full of scrubbed incidents. Michael's eyes narrowed. How many victims? Dalton whispered. Too many to count. And across town, a man sat at a diner counter, watching the news on a dusty TV. A still from the leaked footage flashed on screen. Michael on the ground. Lowry looming. A freeze frame of cruelty. The man took a slow sip of coffee. His knuckles were scarred, his eyes pale and dangerous. He leaned toward the waitress. Can I borrow a pen? She handed him one without looking. He took a napkin and wrote 4 words. Where is Michael Brooks? Then he left the napkin on the counter, next to a $50 tip. At exactly 6 p.m., the nightly news opened with a static glitch. Not the usual headlines. Not the usual anchors. Just a black screen. And a voice. Michael's voice. My name is Michael Brooks. I served my country for 20 years. I lost my legs protecting people who will never know my name. And last week, I was thrown from my wheelchair by 2 police officers who didn't care about who I was, only what I looked like. On screen, the footage played. Lowry tipping him. The fall. The violence. The silence afterward. Then came the files. Redacted documents flashing across the screen like warning lights, complaints, internal memos, corrupted camera logs, body cam tampering, civilian statements buried in digital black holes. Then photos. A small girl with a fractured jaw. An elderly man in a hospital bed. A teenage boy with bruises shaped like fists. All of them, filed under no misconduct. The broadcast ended with Michael's face. Not angry. Just tired. If you believe in justice, don't ask me why I fought back. Ask them why I had to. Then it cut. Within 20 minutes, the precinct was on fire. Not literally. Not yet. But calls flooded dispatch. Reporters swarmed the gates. Protesters gathered outside in a growing tide, wheelchairs, flags, veterans, families. And inside the station, Lowry lost his mind. They set me up, he yelled, pacing like a caged dog. This is bullshit. All of it. Blake slammed the office door shut. You shut your damn mouth until I say otherwise. But it was too late. From the hallway came a single, sharp voice. Brent Lowry. You're under arrest for assault and battery under color of law. Lowry turned, and saw a U.S. Marshal in full gear, stepping forward with cuffs. Behind him, Agent Greer watched calmly. Lowry tried to bolt. He didn't make it 3 steps. And elsewhere, someone else was watching the broadcast, someone off-grid. The man from the diner. He sat alone in a warehouse lit only by a single desk lamp, the video frozen on Michael's face. He picked up an old flip phone, dialed a number, and waited. A voice answered, yeah. I found him. Pause. You sure? The man leaned forward. I trained with him in Fallujah. I know his eyes. He's not done. The other voice said, then finish it. Click. The man looked at the screen again. Then whispered. Sorry, Mike. Orders are orders.